If you're not going to have a growth mindset, you're going to have the shortest leadership ever. A leader never walks past a problem. But also have to recognize that it was a problem, especially when it involves them.
A failure that humbles you but does not teach you is incomplete. A failure that teaches you but does not change your systems is still dangerous. The question is not whether leaders will ever fall short. The question is, when it happens, what do you do next? Welcome to Science of Leadership, where we explore leadership both practically and scientifically. What makes great leadership, why these things matter, and how we can do them well. Those are the questions we wrestle with through thoughtful discussions and real-world stories. I'm Tom Collins, and I'm joined by my friend and co-host, Justin Hamrick. Justin, today's topic actually came to me from a song lyric. I'm not sure if you know my favorite band, but do you know my favorite band?
The Cure?
No. Need to Breathe. I don't know if you've even heard of them. But anyway, they recently released their 10th studio album, and it's called The Long Surrender. And the last song on the album is called Spread the Ashes. And there's this refrain at the end of each verse that says, "Today was just a little better than my best." And I've really been thinking about that a lot from the context of life, but also from the context of leadership. There are moments, there are situations, there are days that demand better than our best. And so that's what I'd like for us to talk about on this podcast episode.
I'd love to get into a little bit more of defining what you mean. When I hear that today demanded a little more than my best, I sort of think of like twofold. Like one, either the moment was too big for you as a leader. You just weren't there yet. You know, it's like going up and facing a batter where you're like, he just had 96 miles an hour fastballs and I can't hit him. Is it that, or that you had to experience something, some growth or something you had to demand more than you have before? Like, did it stretch you? Like, I guess that's what I wanted to get down to. Like, is it that you as a leader weren't big enough for the moment? Like today was too big for me. It was too big. I wasn't there yet. I failed. I'm going to learn from it and move forward. Or I had to dig deeper than I ever had to be successful. So that's sort of what I wanted to get into of like, what do you think that means? Or what did you want to really unpack when you were sort of getting into this?
Yeah, as I've been thinking about it, it is the former more so than the latter. The latter that you're describing is kind of like, hey, I gave 110%. Now, what I'm saying is you gave all you could that particular day in that particular moment, but it wasn't enough. That may be from a number of things. It may be that this guy just throws heat that I cannot catch up to. Right? Like it may be that you just right now, you don't have the ability to get it done. Doesn't mean you can't grow into it. But on this particular day, you didn't have that ability, maybe. It could be that maybe you were actually sick or tired, or you were trying to juggle too many things, or whatever it may be. There's some confluence of factors that led to you being incapable of meeting the need, achieving that, accomplishing that goal in that day, even though you gave the best that you had on that day. In that moment, it wasn't enough. That's how I've been conceptualizing it as I've been thinking about it.
The outcome was not as good as what you had hoped because you had some realization either in the moment or going back and sort of doing an action report at the end of like, man, I didn't give what that demanded, or I couldn't give, honestly, like I couldn't give what that demanded of the moment. It was one of those things where it's like, for whatever reason, wasn't having your best day, your skills aren't up to the task yet. At some point, there was some realization, this got out of my wheelhouse. I gave it everything I got, but it wasn't enough for what the task or the situation demanded.
Yeah, and it created some negative outcome that you need to own. Right? Like that's a big part of it as I've been thinking about it, really is it not just you that you have to be honest with, it's the people that you're leading. Hey, today was just a little better than my best.
You think that happens mostly in the moment, or you think this is during a time of reflection for most people?
Well, this is a good point of differentiation, really, as I'm thinking about it. A lot of people, I don't know what percentage, probably higher than we would want to admit, but I think there are a lot of people that don't reflect on it, period, because they excuse it. They excuse it away. Hey, I was tired. Okay, we all get tired. It doesn't mean that you can give up on your responsibility. That's a part of this discussion is responsibility. You have a responsibility to accomplish this task, this mission, lead these people. Excuses don't absolve you of that responsibility. So I think it's important that we differentiate between an explanation of what occurred and an excuse. I was actually thinking about this earlier too. From my perspective, an explanation is kind of a reasoned accounting or assessment of a given situation that delineates how an error occurred without absolving someone of the responsibility for having fallen short. Whereas an excuse is a way to absolve the person, usually ourselves, right? We're giving the excuse from responsibility. Oh, well, I'm not responsible because this circumstance. No, that's not going to cut it.
So it's interesting. Those two examples you give, the second one doesn't require action, or the one where it's an excuse, not an explanation. It doesn't require action because you're like, oh, this and this happened. So it's like, oh, it rained today. It's just something that happened that you have no control over. So you're not, whereas the first was like, it happened because of this. Okay, now let's think about how for it not to happen again, or let's fix the system, or the lack of the skill, or what happened to not get the sort of optimal result. It's interesting that, that makes a lot more sense when you explain it like that. Now we sort of defined what we're talking about, I think, but like, do you have examples like in history or in your readings or discussion with the generals in your book of like, this is an example where this happened?
There are numerous examples that we can pull from historically. There are numerous examples that I could come up with from my own career or being a parent. I mean, golly, is there any more fertile field than
the parent one? Really hits home for me.
I'll just use a vague example of one of my kids. Okay. And I have a good, also historical one I can share too in a little bit, but I can be operating all cylinders. Everything's going great. I've weathered all sorts of distress at work, all sorts of difficult situations with patients or with faculty who are acting out or whatever it may be. And then get home and one of my kids might say something or do something that just is, and I respond poorly, biting sort of tone or things of that nature when I shouldn't have. When it was inappropriate, when it was unkind. And I can think back even when they were young. I mean, thankfully, I've gotten better. Okay, this is a major point of our conversation: is that just because today was better than your best doesn't mean tomorrow you can't have learned from it and improved. But man, I can tell you so many times when we lived in Little Rock, the kids are younger, and I would just do something poorly, and I would always make it a point. I would go and I would say, you know what? Say my son, Noah, buddy, I'm sorry. I really messed that up. I was loud, yelled, whatever it may have been. And I shouldn't have. Will you forgive me for that? And we'd have a conversation about that. And as I said, I mean, I'm a lot better than I used to be. I've grown so much as a result. I could make an excuse. It was a hard day, really complicated, patient cases or whatever it may have been. But that's all it is, an excuse. Because at the end of the day, I messed up. That day, that moment was better than my best at that moment. And I fell short.
I couldn't count on the number of two hands how many times that's happened to me. That almost that exact same thing. And I was thinking about something as you said it, that I wonder if it applies to leadership too. So much of parenting is essentially leading a team as a parent. And I feel like, at least for me, sometimes the team members closest to me get the worst of me. Meaning, I go to work and they get my very best. But sometimes I come home and I feel like I'm not giving my best at home. And I wonder if that applies as leaders. Like when we have a team that's, a really tight-knit team, but then we interact with other teams or other people, like are our team members not getting our best because we know we've got established relationships with them that probably are a little stronger than those. I know that happens a lot as a parent. And the same thing, like you just have to own it and be better tomorrow than you are today. I wonder if that happens in leadership too.
I'm sure. I mean, I think there's a lot of psychology research that's been done that shows that we tend to be less polished, if we would call it that, with those that we trust most, because we can be more unguarded. And usually unguarded means rough around the edges, or we may say things that are not as kind or as, benign as we might say in some group setting or professional setting or whatever kind of, where we polish it off and make it sound nicer. Invariably, like in a divorce situation, and I'm speaking from when I was a kid, the kids will be less kind to the parent that has the custody of them because they're safe. That's a common phenomenon that you see in human interactions. So the safer you feel psychologically in a relationship, the more likely you are to treat each other not as well as you might others, because you feel safe to release that negative emotion. And so I think that's the same with teams. When you're leading people, I think it's those people that you are closest to, that you develop most psychological safety with, that you probably care the most about. You're going to release more negative emotion because you trust that they care about you and that you have that relationship. Doesn't make it right. We shouldn't do that is the bottom line. I'm just saying that that's what we do, at least in studies of human interactions in groups.
You talk about the people who probably, if you were, just writing it and emotionally, like, who deserves your best? Who deserves when you really bring it? You'd be like, oh, those people, this is my inner circle, my strongest, my people. That parenting example really hits home. When your best isn't good enough, how do you move forward? What about other, outside of parenting, more leadership type examples to really dig into this?
So a good example, I think, is, let me pause here for a second and remind our listeners that my book, The 4 Stars of Leadership, is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and essentially all online outlets. It's getting rave reviews, and I'm certain you will find it not only informative, but also inspiring. So I hope you'll order your copy today. Now let's get back to this interesting conversation. From Admiral, he was called Admiral Bull Halsey, William Halsey, but they called him Bull.
That's awesome. That's an awesome military admiral name.
Yeah, so he was huge. He actually was one of very few. I think it's, I think there have been maybe 4 or 5 5-star admirals in the history of our Navy, and so he was one who made it to 5-star. We don't do 5-star anymore, but he did in World War II. So anyway, he was a commander, I think, of the Pacific Fleet. Okay, the whole Pacific Fleet in World War II. So this is gigantic leadership role, and in December of 1944, he was operating near the Philippines, and they came into what was called Typhoon Cobra, and it's actually since been nicknamed Halsey's Typhoon. But they stormed, they steamed into this typhoon, and the storm sank like 3 destroyers and damaged multiple ships, destroyed multiple aircraft, killed hundreds of sailors. And the U.S. Navy's historical account says the Court of Inquiry placed responsibility for the losses and storm damage on Bull Halsey. It didn't find him negligent per se. It described his actions as errors in judgment committed under the stress of war operations. So that gets to, there are multiple things that can result in today demanding better than our best. Halsey wasn't incompetent. He was one of the most consequential naval commanders actually in all of U.S. history. But in that moment, the situation exceeded his judgment, his information, and perhaps his readiness to recognize the danger. If somebody of Admiral Halsey's stature can have a moment where the circumstances, the stress, the information gaps, the pressure of the mission produce a catastrophic judgment like that, then none of us, I think, should pretend that it couldn't happen to us, that we're immune somehow. So the question is not whether leaders will ever fall short. That's a stupid question. The question is, when it happens, what do you do next? That defines the kind of leader that you are.
I mean, first it's got to be recognition, right? Like, even before you decide, like, what do I do next? But like, understanding that no leader is perfect and that your own judgments are not infallible. To be able to step back, and even if you think you're right, or you thought you were at 100% or everything went fine, like, but what if I'm not? Or always asking the question, that sort of growth mindset of, how am I going to be better tomorrow than I am today? Like, I think the first thing's got to be, before you can even move, is like recognition that you weren't big enough for the day, or qualified enough, or didn't make the right decision. And that sort of goes back to those 2 circumstances you talked about. One is, all right, what happened? How could I have been better? What could I have done differently? And the other is excusing it. Wow, God, you know what? It's Monday. was on call last night. I just didn't get much sleep. That's why, that's why I didn't make the great decision. And I'm not saying that there aren't circumstances, but I think
there are always
exactly.
circumstances, though. That's the thing, right?
I mean, golly, how many examples in history of great leaders overcoming the circumstances where you're like, oh my gosh, anybody should not have been able to do X, Y, and Z, and somebody did it.
Yeah, I mean, like, let's think about it, right? Like, if Michael Jordan was playing you and me, part of his greatness is that he was playing against other great players, and he overcame them. And the team, the Chicago Bulls, overcame those, right? So when we make excuses, that by default almost says, hey, I'm not really good at this. It's on some level, right? Because greatness is what overcomes those circumstances, or learns from the circumstances in failure and overcomes them in the future.
Yeah. We've given a lot of examples on this podcast of sort of overcoming circumstances as a leader. Like, the one that comes to mind is, the one we mentioned about Washington, when he could have easily at the end of his presidency really he had the political capital really to turn it into a monarchy or to change the term limits or anything that probably almost every other leader at the time would have done and would have been, at the time excusable pretty easily, honestly. But, sort of to overcome those and to be better than that. And I think that's sort of what leaders should go for, is like recognition of circumstances, recognition of when you're not as good as the circumstances would demand, and how to move forward.
Yeah. Let's move into the so what kind of component of our podcast here on this episode, and really look at, why does this matter? As you think about it, Justin, why do you think this idea matters?
I think it is the cornerstone of a growth mindset. It's sort of akin to a physician graduating residency. They've been studying, they've been growing, they've been studying, they're growing. And then at the end of the residency, they can do one of two things. They can be like, well, I've been trained to be X physician, or this is what I'm going to go forward, and I'm going to practice that way. And you go forward and you do things. But if you're not looking every day at, where is my knowledge gap? How could I have been better? How can I do this? Then when medicine changes, when diseases change, you are going to be inadequate. The things I was trained for years ago are not good enough for today to do what I want. And a leader's no different like that. I see, if you're not going to have a growth mindset, this is really at the cornerstone of that. Recognition of your deficit, no matter what leader you are, your recognition of that deficit and your focus on how to be better tomorrow. Better never rests, right? Like you're going to be better. If not, I mean, the so what, you're going to have the shortest leadership ever, because you won't be adequate. Like the situation's going to change. The teams, even if you had it today, tomorrow's going to be different. It's going to have different challenges. You'll bring on new team members with their own different issues that you need to navigate, that you need to refine your toolbox for.
And if we look at the 4 C's, right, of leadership from my work, character. I mean, if you don't admit, everybody else sees you screw it up, like they see you screw it up, whether it's acting poorly, making bad decisions, whatever it may be, they see that. If you don't admit it, they say this person's got a flaw in their character. Can't trust them. They're going to be doubting whatever you say, whatever you recommend. If it's because you can't hit the 96 mile an hour fastball today, you lack the competence to do whatever that was required that day, then they'll say this person's incompetent. Steer clear of that. That's dangerous. And then if you don't admit it, they'll say this person doesn't care about me, doesn't care about our team, doesn't care about the mission, what we're trying to accomplish. The communication part, I don't know if this applies so much to that, but it certainly applies to 3 out of 4. And you want to talk about eroding your leadership capability or influence, man, it can have tremendous negative consequences in that regard.
We talked about this sort of in a previous podcast when we talked about accountability, like holding others accountable was the focus of that. But, another huge thing of this is holding yourself accountable. Like, I mean, it's the same thing we were talking about there, like recognition that your expectations, assuming as a leader, your expectation is to be a superior leader. If that's your expectations, you didn't meet that, Where was that gap? What is your action plan? I mean, that's the whole of what we're talking about. And you're exactly right. If you're trying to hold others accountable as a leader and you don't hold yourself accountable, what do you always say? They
It's
can smell
laughable,
smoke.
right?
People can smell smoke.
Yeah, right. Smoke
Smoke detectors.
detectors.
They know it. Like they know they're going to know you're incompetent. And if you can't recognize that, they're not going to trust your judgment.
Right.
Nothing, because they're like,
Yeah.
he can't even hold himself accountable for his mistakes, his gaps, the lacking. Not, again, we're not talking about, like when we're talking about accountability, we're not talking about moral traits. Like we're talking about performance or knowledge gaps or something that wasn't enough for today. And how are you going to get there?
And it may be that today you were ill, you were overloaded, you were distracted, you were whatever. Okay, tomorrow don't be that. And we'll talk about in the latter part, in the practical application part of the podcast, steps that you can put in place to improve this. Better tomorrow than today. How do we do that? So yeah, it's absolutely imperative. Do you have any examples that you can think of?
One that sort of
experience?
keeps coming to mind was, I was at work and was a leader of a team, and the team sort of decided to go in one direction. It was a fairly small team, except one person decided to go in another direction. And in hindsight, I realized I had sort of a real opportunity there for personal growth and everything. But I let my emotions and my pride get hurt by it, because I was very invested in the one decision and really thought that that was right. But I had a really hard time of seeing it from the other person's perspective, and I reacted poorly. Because I felt hurt, I felt betrayed, like a lot of things that just sort of get in the way of good leadership. Like I took it very personally, which, that's its own problem. And so I've really had to, and this has taken me weeks to months, to really sort of back off and be like, man, I really missed the boat on that one. I had the chance to take myself out of it, meaning my pride, my emotions, my decision. Like I had a chance to remove myself and really act as a leader. And I missed that one. And I've had opportunities that I hope I've done better more recently, but that's the one that really sort of hindered me. And it was my own weakness and my own sort of blind spot to understand that there are some trigger points for me that really stir up negative emotion and that really attack my pride, that I need to know for the next time that maybe I need to take a step and be like, you know what? You make a good point. Let me think more about this. Maybe I need to take a pause, just because of my tendency is to react emotionally to certain things. So that's one for me that has in the past really been an issue.
And I think that a lot of us probably have those experiences, especially when we work in, and again, it's not an excuse. This is recognizing and putting in place mechanisms to help us safeguard against today being better than our best. But when we work in high intensity environments, especially when it's day after day, really emotional stuff, like for us, right? Like we're dealing with life and death, but life and death of somebody's kid. And so the intensity of that can be just really a pressure cooker. And so I'm thinking of this one moment. This was probably 8 years ago, maybe no, more than that, 9 or 10 years ago. I was in the ICU. I had this patient who had Epstein's anomaly, underwent a surgery, and it went really poorly. So we're rounding on the patient. The patient's on ECMO, and the ICU attending wanted to take him off ECMO. And I didn't. I wanted, let's give him, this was probably 24, 48 hours maybe into the ECMO run. This is going, the ICU attending's like, this is going nowhere. We just need to stop, give him. We're only a short, no. Right. And it escalated right there in the rounds. And I just got very emotional about it. No, you're not giving up on my patient. And there was a lot better way I could handle that. But immediately I was like, oh my goodness. So as soon as rounds were over, I was like, hey, can we go over here? And we went into this room and I said, I'm sorry. I really blew it there. I understand where you're coming from. Here's where I'm coming from. And I'm sorry. Really, I hope you'll forgive me for, I think I would describe it. I'm trying to decide, did I yell? I think I yelled, I would say I don't yell unless I get to really a pretty far end of the spectrum. I can be very incisive in what I say without yelling. I can get my point across without yelling. But I think I yelled in that moment. And I apologize to the members of the team too. And I haven't done it again. But that was an example of that day was better than my best. That moment was better than my best. And I can make all kinds of excuses for it, but at the end of the day, there was a better way to handle it. And I've learned from that and grown. So that's an example, I would say. I got another example that I can think of from history. We've talked about John F. Kennedy, usually in very positive terms on our podcast in the past. In April of 1961 was an event that was not quite as positive in that he authorized the Bay of Pigs invasion. So he attempted an attempt by these Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro, and the whole operation was a complete failure, like an utter failure. It was about 1,400 Cuban exiles, and the Cuban aircraft attacked the invasion force. Ships were sunk. Air support was inadequate. The operation totally collapsed. That was early in Kennedy's presidency. And people might say, well, he inherited, elements of this plan and all, but ultimately he authorized the plan. They moved it forward. And if you read about the Bay of Pigs and what happened, there was a lot of echo chamber. People told Kennedy only what they thought he wanted to hear. And he seemingly received what he only wanted to hear. But afterward, rather than blaming a bunch of people, he owned it. The responsibility, said it was his fault. The Bay of Pigs, to some degree, damaged his credibility, but it also shaped how he led the Cuban Missile Crisis. And during that crisis, he created a more deliberative process, took people's inputs, really listened, had people speaking out, sort of devil's advocate, looking from different perspectives, debating the options. They did it over several days and resisted the pressure to move too quickly. And so were able to obviously prevent World War III and nuclear holocaust. And so I think that the Bay of Pigs is a powerful example, for Kennedy, how he had a bad moment, if we say, but he didn't let that become his future. He didn't stay with that modus operandi. He looked at it and he changed, he grew, he got better. The important leadership question in that is what that failure did to him. Did it make him defensive? Did it make him brittle? Did it make him double down, which can be a tendency?
I'm not wrong. I can't be wrong.
Right, exactly. You push to a point, you're like, your amygdala takes over and it's all just about winning or whatever. It made him more careful, more humble, more willing to test assumptions, more attentive to the people, the processes around him. So in that moment, the presidency demanded better than his best, the Bay of Pigs, but he learned from it. And as a result, his best became better. And humanity still exists instead of being consumed in a, nuclear holocaust.
Well, he certainly he did an action review. I mean, he looked at it and he's like, okay, well, I just got this from another president. I'm really on. It's my general's fault. It was the plan. It wasn't that. But he seemed to look at it and say, okay, maybe I've got this weak spot. How do I install in myself and in the system I'm operating in safeguards for this? People do it in sports all the time. I have a hard time hitting the fastball. All right, I'm going to change my swing a little bit and swing just a little bit faster with this pitcher that I know throws hard. Adapting, not just being well, my swing's perfect. I'm going to do this. Nope. Okay. I'm going to move a little farther back in the batter's box so I can get a little more time to hit this but they're not blaming the situation. They're not blaming, well, it's just a great pitcher. I just can't hit him. Okay. I'm going to get up to bat again. How am I going to change it? But first they have to recognize something's wrong, right? Some inadequacy. And I think, especially when emotion comes into it or pride, certainly in my own experience, that was a really tough hurdle. When you're holding yourself accountable and you start to gray that is this an innate characteristic that I just don't have? That really takes a great leader to put the microscope on that. Not just the situation, not just the circumstances, but was there something that I'm lacking that I need to work on? There's some characteristic I have that needs honing, polishing, strengthening, so that it doesn't happen again, so that the team and the vision and the goal of the team can move forward.
Now would be a good time to do the science break.
So I think we've given some pretty good examples, both historically, personally, really defined it, sort of talked about why it really matters to leadership. But let's get to where we always get to on the Science of Leadership podcast. Is there science about this? Like the leader holding themselves accountable? Is there research being done of like, why does it matter? The recognition, the end action report, the whatever you want to call it in this situation.
Yeah, so there's actually a useful body of research around this idea. And it tells us that what leaders do after a mistake matters enormously. Not just whether they feel bad, not just whether they explain what happened, but whether they take responsibility in a way that repairs trust and changes future behavior. Peter Kim and colleagues studied how apology versus denial affects trust repair after competence-based and integrity-based violations. And their work is mainly about leaders falling short of what the moment required, so really applicable to what we're talking about. And they found that responses to trust violations are not one-size-fits-all. Apology can be especially relevant when the issue is competence, while integrity violations are more complicated because admitting wrongdoing can confirm suspicions about character. So if I fall short because I was not capable enough, prepared enough, or attentive enough, then pretending it did not happen usually makes things worse. A real apology says, hey, I see where I fell short. I own that. I understand that my shortcoming affected you, and I apologize for that. A related study by Kim, Dirks, Cooper, and Farron examined internal versus external attributions after trust violations. And the title itself captures the point: when more blame is better than less. In other words, when trust has been damaged by a competence-related failure, taking internal responsibility, hey, this is my fault, can sometimes be more trust repairing than pushing blame outward. And that's counterintuitive for a lot of leaders. We may think it's safer to explain all the external factors. I was tired, the system's broken, I had bad information, I was overloaded, whatever it may be. Some of that may be true. Again, if we talk, just as we talked about earlier, if the explanation sounds like an attempt to escape responsibility, it will not repair trust. It will weaken it further. Finally, Cannon and Edmondson's work on failing to learn and learning to fail intelligently argues that organizations can put failure to work when they examine it, learn from it, and improve systems rather than merely blame or hide the problem. This gets to the very heart of quality improvement work that we're seeing in hospitals across the nation. That's absolutely the heart of it. In a subsequent article in the Harvard Business Review, Amy Edmondson similarly emphasized that learning from failure requires context-specific analysis, not simplistic blame or the assumption that all failure is the same. So a failure that humbles you but does not teach you is incomplete. A failure that teaches you but does not change your systems is still dangerous. The goal is not just to feel bad. The goal is to become better and make the system better. So if we put these three concepts together, the research points us to three big ideas. First, trust repair usually requires some form of ownership. I did that. I screwed that up. I'm sorry. Second, explanations are useful only when they help people understand what happened without dodging responsibility. And finally, the real test of a leader's apology is whether it leads to learning, changed behavior, and better safeguards. So that's what the science tells us.
When you were saying all that, going through a quality class right now, I mean, that's the heart of it, right? Like the end result of the PDSA cycle is, all right, okay, well, this happens. Are we going to act on it? Are we going to adapt it? Like, what are we going to do? Like, that's such a big thing. It's interesting to break it down in those three things that the study's sort of shown. Like, yes, you have to accept, like, you need to hold yourself accountable for what part was yours in the failure. Not fake, like, you didn't have any involvement in, oh, it's all my fault. Like, not that, like real accountability, but then explaining it only into help people understand the circumstances. But then, okay, that we've got the circumstance. How do we move forward? How do we move forward in this? And that really leads us to a great place, which is where we always like to wrap these things up. How do we as leaders put what we've learned over the past hour in use? Like, how do we get there? Like, yeah, these are very abstract things we're talking about, of like holding yourself accountable, being better. I mean, better tomorrow. Like, they're good slogans and they're good bumper stickers, but like, how do we do it? Like, I mean, you could just tell yourself, look in the mirror and be like, I'm going to be better today than I was tomorrow. But like, practically, how do we do it? How do we change?
So I was thinking about this, and actually, as we've kind of gone through the conversation, we've hit on these things. But as I was thinking about it, there were 4 ideas or recommendations, I guess, that came to my mind, and you may have some additional ones. But the first, own it. Okay, own it. The leader has to say plainly, "I fell short. I screwed up here." When I was in the ICU, owned it. I owned it immediately, not later. Right then, own it. The situation required more from me than I was able to give in that moment. And that can't be wrapped in self-protection. I mean, you got to be vulnerable. You got to be honest. And it shouldn't begin with framing it as, "I'm sorry, but," insert excuse here, right? Our apology should name the shortcoming between what the role required and what we actually delivered. Saying something like, "Hey, I want to acknowledge something. I didn't handle that the way I should. The moment needed better for me, and I'm sorry." That simple. Not a bunch of excuses or anything like that. "I fell short. I should have done better. I'm sorry." Number 2, explain it without excusing it.
That's a big one.
Yeah. "Hey, here's what I think happened." That's not an excuse. It's my attempt to understand the failure clearly enough that I can prevent it from happening in the future. We can become fatigued, overloaded, ill. We may lack the skill. We may be stressed. We may be poorly prepared. We may have bad information. The system may be inadequate, but only in the service of learning should we talk about those things, not for the sake of absolution of our responsibility as leaders. So that's number 2. Number 3, repair what can be repaired. We've always got to be asking, who was affected by my falling short? What do I need to say to them? What do I need to do to make this right as much as it can be made right? And let's not forget, some failures have consequences, very real consequences. An apology does not erase the consequence. It keeps us from adding denial, defensiveness, avoidance to the original failure, but we still got to deal with the consequences, right? We can be sorry. We can learn from that, but at the end of the day, it doesn't change the consequences from that happening. And the 4th one I came up with, and we've hit on this kind of intermittently throughout this conversation, is build safeguards. And I want to emphasize, safeguards are not just personal habits per se, okay? Sometimes personal habits are insufficient because the problem is that the situation required more than the leader had available that day. So safeguards include things like, who has strengths I don't have? Who can see the warning signs before I see them? Who has permission to tell me, "Tom, this is one of those moments where the situation may be demanding better than your best"? I mean, having those people in our lives that we give permission, that we empower to speak into our biggest opportunities for failure. All leaders have to have some people like that they say, "Hey, I need you. If you see me going down this road of stupidity, I need you to jump out and go, hey." And maybe you have some kind of signal word. I don't know. Some people have that, right? Like horseshoe, I don't know, some word that gets people to stop and go, "Oh, I'm going down that road," right? What system would make it less likely that this depends entirely on me next time? That sort of thinking to build those safeguards so that you don't mess up. Somebody else is looking at you and assessing the situation and knows you well enough to say, "Hey, this is going to be a stressor. This is going to be a point of, or having somebody that you say, "Hey, I'm not the best public speaker. Here's this person. We're going to have them do the speaking." That sort of thing. The mature leader doesn't just say, "Hey, I'll try hard next time," because trying hard is not enough. Sometimes the most responsible answer is, "Next time, I need other people and better systems around me."
Right.
So those are the 4 things. Own it, explain it without making excuses, repair what you can, and build in safeguards.
Probably the only other one I would add is the one that probably comes before number 1, which is holding yourself accountable. We talked about this a lot in the accountability episode we did of establishment of a standard, a very clear standard, and then recognition when it's not met. And you'd mentioned like a leader never walks past a problem, but also have to recognize that it was a problem, especially when it involves them. I think about my kids and I have this thing that we do around dinner sometimes, like, all right, what were your highs? What were your lows? Asking about their day at school. You got to ask yourself that. Like, even if you feel good about how the day went and everything,
Yeah.
you've got to be like, okay, what were the lows? Even if it went successfully, the mission was a success, the patient did well, everything. But like, how can I be better tomorrow? And that is the real one, is either, like you said, have someone that can speak in, like, hey, I don't think that went as well as it could have gone. And being open to listen to those people, but also asking, being sort of having the habit of not always saying, well, that was a failure. That's not what I mean, but like, that went really well. How can it be better? How
Yeah.
can that be better? I've got a friend that always puts in their own safeguards, and theirs is they never answer an email at night, especially if it's an important email. They'll usually write a draft, sleep on it, and they'll send it the next. And that's because they know they have a tendency to react emotionally, especially if it was an emotionally charged subject. So they never respond to an email that they're going to respond to without sleeping on it and really thinking about it. And but that's the safeguard, because they actually looked at themselves and it's like, okay, excuse me. I mean, they could have dismissed it and be like, well, I had to tell that person how it went. But they thought, like, how could I have done this better? And they created a system, knowing their own characteristics, of like, how am I going to be better tomorrow? I love those 4. I think that tackles all of the elements of the issue. Acceptance of what part you played in it, dealing with the consequences and those people that affected, identifying the situation, but then moving on to, we've recognized it, we've identified it, but how are we going to be better tomorrow? Which is really the biggest one.
Yeah, the words of, and I think I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but the words of Admiral Jim Hogg are just echoing in my head, because he told me his practice every night. He would stop at the end of the day and he would say, okay, what could I have done better today? Every day, at the end of the day, you have the opportunity to be better or worse. And it's all up to you. And so this is the same sort of thing. But if we don't admit it, if we don't recognize it and own it, then that's failure. It's only failure if you don't learn from it and get better, right? So I think a final question that I'll just leave out there for our listeners. Where in your leadership life right now might the situation be demanding better than your best? And who or what do you need to put around you so that the people you lead are not dependent on your best alone? A bad day does not have to define you. A failure does not have to be the final word, but that's only true if we're willing to tell the truth about it. When today demands better than our best, the answer is not denial, shame, or excuse making. The answer is ownership, repair, learning, and safeguards. That's how a leader's best becomes better. Thanks for joining me on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion gave you practical tools and a deeper understanding of how you can become a better leader starting today. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share the episode with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, confidence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.